Welcome to the Evening Review. My name is Ohana Klache, and joining us in studio is Lifeline International CEO, Ms. Thilini Perera.
Yes.
Did I say it correctly?
It's Thilini Perera.
Thilini Perera, my
right.
apologies.
Not at all.
And welcome to Namibia.
Thank you for having me. It's been really wonderful to be in Namibia. It's my first time, and everyone's been very welcoming. We had a great Namibian feast last night, so I got to taste the food and experience some of the culture, and it's been really warm and inviting.
Just to sort of give us an introduction into the organization that you represent, what is Lifeline, and what is it the work that you do, and what is it that you aim to achieve?
Yeah, of course. So Lifeline International is a member-based organization. We have 26 members across 23 countries in the world, and our collective shared vision is a world without suicide. And our mission is to ensure that quality suicide prevention services are available, accessible and encouraged in countries around the world. So our members are amazing. They do life-saving work on the ground in countries. The core sort of focus and where they do that is through the provision of a crisis helpline. And that is a line that people who are feeling distressed or experiencing a crisis can actually call at those times to receive help when they need it the most. Most of our members also deliver community-based suicide prevention work, like training the community to identify the signs of someone experiencing that distress and to refer them on to get help. So our job at Lifeline International is to actually support our members to deliver these services, and we do that through a couple of different ways. Knowledge sharing, sometimes financial support, through advocacy, using our members' voices to elevate that on a platform globally to shape global policy around suicide prevention. So these are the ways that we support our members, but really they're the heroes. They do all the work on the front lines to save lives every day.
And then I would understand that there's currently a Lifeline Africa Region Forum taking place.
Yes.
What are the aims of the forum, and just to give us a scope of the what is the significance of this forum?
It's a very important moment for us as a member network. For nearly 2 years, the lifelines across Africa have been meeting, on Zoom, on Teams, online every quarter, not really having the opportunity to come together in person, due to a number of reasons. Most notably the pandemic, where we couldn't all travel, but also resourcing and different issues as to why we couldn't meet in person. So this is a really significant moment because it's the first time that we've all come together in person to actually work on shared challenges and opportunities in suicide prevention. And we're so pleased that Lifeline Childline Namibia volunteered to host this gathering, where Lifeline South Africa, Lifeline Botswana, Lifeline Malawi, the Ghana Association for Suicide Prevention, Lifeline Zambia, we're all here together, Lifeline International, for the first time in a very, very long time in person. And the aim of coming together was really a couple of different things. Firstly, to create a space for knowledge sharing and peer learning, to strengthen links within the region. There's not enough resourcing all the time to duplicate efforts. So when we can build once and share often, we often, want to do that and take that option. The other thing is about sharing and developing together policy solutions, sharing best practice, and identifying opportunities that we can work on together to advance suicide prevention in our respective countries. We're also pleased to be joined by the Africa CDC. They've come along to understand from Lifeline the work we're doing and how that community-based support and community-based health actually works and fits in with the wider system. We've had representatives from Namibia's Ministry of Health and Social Services join us. So it's been a very productive 2 days so far, understanding the stats and the trends in deaths by suicide within the region, within the sub-regional trends, and here in Namibia as well, and working out strategies for the future.
You mentioned the COVID-19 pandemic and how it limited the sister organizations from meeting. From that aspect, because there were no means to meet in person, how would you say it affected the work of Lifeline to sort of try and prevent suicides because of the fact that people were in isolation?
Yeah, I think there's two things. Firstly, for us as member organizations, certainly it's always better to meet in person where we can rather than always online. The online's a good sort of alternate and a gap filler at times, but there's nothing like really coming together and spending that time and dedicating that time for strategic purposes, because the energy in the room is different, the problem solving is sometimes quicker in some ways because we're able to discuss and have that open and honest dialogue. Separately, in terms of the pandemic and the demand for services, it was a very busy time in every country for services like ours, because once people were in isolation, they weren't often going in person to receive help. So often digital means became the access point of the day. So I know a lot of our members told us that during that pandemic, we saw an increase in demand for crisis support services, because whether it was people were anxious or in isolation, they were reaching out for help, which, by the way, we think it's a good thing when people are encouraged to reach out for help. Part of coming together is to talk about what have we learned through the pandemic and ways of working that we can carry forward into a post-pandemic world. Certainly it's not always ideal to do things online, but there's probably a hybrid model that we can use moving forward.
And then there were recent figures showing how Namibia is dealing with the issue of suicides and highlighting Namibia as probably having a very negative situation. How do you think Lifeline Namibia can step in and to help government and to help other civil society organizations deal with this issue of suicide?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that in any country, having a national suicide prevention strategy and policy is important, because it is the best way to have a coordinated approach to addressing a challenge like suicide, particularly given the numbers that you've alluded to. I understand here in Namibia that suicide prevention strategy is being created, and Lifeline Namibia is part of that process, and we commend the ministry for doing that. I think it's really important to get a number of people involved in the development of a strategy like that, whether it's CSOs, service providers, people with lived experience. I think all of these stakeholders have to come together to inform how we can have a coordinated approach to address suicides in the country. And I think that it's happening. I know that Lifeline Namibia has been at those meetings and contributing their knowledge and expertise as a service provider and what they're hearing, and understanding from communities as well. So I think that's the first step. I also think in any strategy, it's good to have really clear goals on what we're going to do and how we're going to measure success. So to do that, we need sort of data monitoring, data gathering and monitoring systems to know that once the strategy is in place, they were actually monitoring for success. Have we hit the goals that we're hoping to achieve in this strategy? And finally, I would be remiss if I wouldn't give a shout out to crisis helplines. We believe there's a role for crisis helplines to play in national suicide prevention strategy, the role of service delivery to ensure we're encouraging people proactively to reach out and seek help. When someone calls a crisis helpline, they don't always have to be feeling suicidal. You can be experiencing distress, you can be experiencing a crisis. We encourage you to reach out because we can help with de-escalating the crisis so it doesn't get to a dire point. So I think having a national suicide prevention strategy and policy, which I know the government is working on, engaging a wide range of stakeholders, CSOs, people with lived experience to shape those policies and activities is important, monitoring and evaluation, and of course the role of crisis helplines.
Well, want to shift, want to speak more on suicide, but as any other platform, we have to pay bills, so we'll take a short commercial break.
to another exciting episode of Ironggo Talk.
Is die weer en vertel ook vir julle waar die vis heel moontlik gaan byt.
We are so excited to be kickstarting your morning with entertainment.
Everything was happening during this past weekend.
Yes.
Exciting news.
Wow, no, she was killing it already.
In my opinion, I don't see anything wrong with him serving the full term.
As well as keeping you informed on the issues that you need to know happening in and around our country.
Welcome back to the Evening Review. We are coming out of a pandemic period where people may have contemplated suicide as a consequence of either losing their jobs, incomes having been affected, this lack of access to other people, being in isolation. Have you seen the situation improve in terms of reining in the number of suicides as a result of these lockdown measures now being relaxed a bit?
Look, I think, the pandemic was basically unprecedented times, right? We've never experienced anything like it ever. And I think people had to really learn how to cope in those extraordinary circumstances. What we know at the time was that in some ways, the pandemic brought forward a very necessary conversation around good mental health and suicide prevention. It actually brought a focus on it that has not been there before in most countries, in most communities, and more of an awareness of us as individuals of the need to look after not just our physical health, but our mental well-being as well. So in I guess, one sense, the pandemic really escalated and accelerated that focus that was really needed on looking after suicide prevention and mental health. So we saw then that in that time there's also more of a focus of people and governments encouraging people to reach out for help. And so we then received an increased demand in most countries for our services around the crisis helpline. We think that's a good thing, right? And I think while the pandemic restrictions have eased in most countries, there are other challenges now in the world. In some places there are wars, the cost of living is high in most countries. The social and economic challenges, I think, in most countries continue to exist in different forms, either as a result of the pandemic or due to new issues coming up. So I think the reality is we will expect to see demand for services, suicide prevention, crisis support services continue, and so it should. We will always encourage people to reach out for help. It's better to reach out and receive that help rather than contemplate that in silence and lead to dire outcomes. So I think the pandemic was a really interesting exercise of fast-tracking, the conversations that we really needed to have as communities around suicide prevention, around mental health, and ensuring that there was a focus on reaching out for help.
What would you list, and looking at this picture holistically, what would you list as being among the biggest challenges for organizations such as yourself in dealing with this issue of suicides?
Look, I think there's a couple of things. Firstly, in some countries, in 40 countries around the world today, attempted suicide and suicide remains a crime. So that is a legislative, barrier to seeking help, in our view. There are also other barriers to seeking help. Sometimes the help is available, but barriers exist that don't let people actually reach the help that they need. That is a challenge because we can put services out there, we can ensure there are people available to answer the call, but there could be a couple of reasons people aren't calling. There's a barrier to seeking help, people don't know about it, or actually stigma that people don't want to be seen to be accessing help. So these are key things that we need to work through because we need to encourage people to seek help, raise awareness, and we need to normalize reaching out for help. We all, both of us, you would have good days and bad days. I have good days and bad days. We were just talking in the Lifeline forum earlier today, it's sort of a pendulum, right? There's when you're well and whole and not feeling sick, and then there's this end of the spectrum where sometimes you're not feeling well. No one's ever on one side completely. We're all swinging. There are days that we are really, really well, and there's days that we might not be feeling the best version of ourselves, or feeling sad, or feeling like we can't cope. We all have that. So we need to be able to have that conversation openly, remove the stigma around saying, hey, I need help, and then not feeling bad about accessing it. You know, earlier today, my colleagues from different parts of the continent was saying that if someone's going in to see their psychologist or their psychiatrist, they're quickly checking left and right on the street to make sure no one's seeing them going in. That is a challenge in every country in the world. We can't say that stigma doesn't exist. We have to each do our part to normalize reaching out for help. And these are some of the issues we have to encounter to ensure we can get people to access the service, to receive the help they need.
There's a movement growing, particularly, maybe not so popular in this part of the world, but in general, in the developed world, of assisted suicides. How much of a bearing does that have on the work that Lifeline does?
We haven't really participated in that discussion. You know, our job is to ensure that the service is available to people who need it, and we will always be there to support people in crisis. Our focus has largely been around the decriminalization of suicide. And I know that that has been contentious because people think we're glorifying suicide or sanctioning it by removing by decriminalizing it. That is actually a very misunderstood issue, right? In 40 countries around the world today, someone, sitting there is feeling like they can't reach out and say, I'm experiencing these thoughts, because they have fear of being sanctioned or receiving a penalty or being prosecuted. We know that there are some countries, even very recently, where someone attempted to take their life and was prosecuted and put in jail. That is not giving people the help that they need. It's a cry for help. We need to actually remove and change those laws so that we can actually ensure that people are feeling that they can reach out for help. We just heard this week at our forum from the Ghana Association for Suicide Prevention. So the government in Ghana recently decriminalized suicide a couple of months ago. So the team from there was sharing the journey they've been on. And the effect of having a decriminalized suicide in that country is that it also shifts the conversation about stigma. How can you reduce stigma if something is a crime? So they're on a really interesting journey, and they shared those learnings with us over the last couple of days. They're on a journey of decriminalizing the law, removing, working hard to remove stigma, and putting in a coordinated strategy in place. And now we're working with them to set up a helpline, a crisis support helpline in Ghana, so that people can access that help. So our focus really has been about the legislative changes around decriminalizing suicide, how we remove that barrier, how do we get people the help that they need. We're actually getting ready to launch a global campaign in October to decriminalize suicide across the 40 countries in the world where it is a crime. And we hope to receive the support of a number of communities around the world as a movement that we need to elevate this conversation and look at change in legislation.
Having now visited Namibia, and I wouldn't know to what extent you've been able to assess the situation on the ground, but in terms of the tools and that Lifeline Namibia has at its disposal, and the fact that government is looking at launching a strategy, how would you rate the effectiveness of government or Lifeline Namibia? Do you think? Are you satisfied with work done to combat suicides?
I think there's always, the challenge is so large, there's always going to be more that needs to be done. But I have to say I was really pleased to see ministry officials present at this meeting, really engaged in conversation and the work and learning from other countries. So I think there's a lot to like there in terms of what is happening. And I saw a real commitment from the individuals who were present from the ministry. The Deputy Executive Director was there yesterday. I had the opportunity to meet with your Deputy Minister for Health and Social Services a couple of weeks ago as well. So definitely I have witnessed in those conversations a commitment to advancing suicide prevention. I can't speak to all of the aspects of it because I haven't spent a lot of time on the detail, but certainly in the conversations I've had, I've felt very positive about that. In terms of Lifeline, Childline Namibia, I have to say all of the countries present today were really heartened to hear about the amount of work that's happening. It's not just the helpline, right? It's also education. They're working with schools, with young people to actually equip them early in life to be able to be resilient and to have coping skills. I think that's really important. They seem to be working across all aspects of the community. And I think, again, that's really important because suicide doesn't discriminate. You know, you could be any age, you could be in any part of the country, you could be in any community and be experiencing a crisis. So I've been really pleased to see Lifeline, Childline Namibia working across a huge spectrum, both geographically and socially, across the community and engaging the community in that work. I think there's also some social and cultural factors that, you know, in every country will play into suicide prevention. And I've seen Lifeline Namibia seeking to address that. So I think not just providing the crisis line, but providing education to the community, gatekeeper training, working with officials, being integrated into the health system and other social services. So I see a real effort to do this as a coordinated effort. And I think that's most important because we can never go it alone. The challenge is too big. We have to work together.
And then I think just in closing, for the layperson, for the untrained eye, I'd like to combine this question. What does one look out for example, a family member or a friend or a colleague who might be suicidal, and how does one shape yourself to assist this person not to commit suicide, but also not say something or do something that could trigger this person to want to attempt suicide?
It's a very good question, and I think again, as a community, we need to spend more time on how we identify these signs. But from my end, I think usually people are actually giving us signs along the way. They're not always keeping it hidden because people actually inherently want to survive, usually, right? So the signs might be, if that someone is extroverted or outgoing usually and they're extremely quiet, or you've noticed a change in behavior or personality, I think you should ask, you know, is everything okay? You've seen a bit different to usual. Are you okay? I think it's okay to ask the question directly, are you okay? Often you'd be surprised, people will open up if you ask. I think we just don't usually want to ask because we think people want to be private or not share that. But I think you should ask directly. You know, are their usual habits changing? Are they eating a lot, not eating at all? If they exercise a lot usually, but they're, you know, staying indoors or can't get out of bed in the morning. All these changes in behavior and habits, I think if we notice that in someone close to us, we should ask the question. And we should ask it directly. Are you feeling okay? Is everything okay? Do you want to talk about something? If not me, would you like me to connect you with someone who could have a conversation with you? And normalizing reaching out for help. You know, encourage, and I think at that point, providing a referral into an organization like Lifeline that can provide that support is important, because not every person might feel like they can have that conversation. That's okay. Take it to the point that you ask the first question, are you okay? No, I'm not. Okay, do you need help? Let me connect you with someone who can actually help, either Lifeline or a local service provider, whoever that might be. Then you provide that referral and you make sure they actually use the referral to get that help. So I think having those conversations, taking the time out to ask people if they're okay, taking the time to observe what's happening with our friends, our loved ones, our co-workers, I think noticing these changes in behavior or attitude or habits is important, and asking the direct question. I think sometimes we're very busy in today's world. You might come into work, I'm guilty of this, you're guilty of this, we rush around. You might not spend time even asking your co-worker, how are you going this week? Has it been a really tough week? Or if you know it's been a particularly difficult time, you should reach out. If someone's being diagnosed with an illness or is feeling unwell, reach out and ask, because you don't know how far that could go for them.
Thank you so much for joining us on the Evening Review.
Thanks for having me.
And we, on behalf of the Evening Review team, wish you a pleasant flight back to Australia.
Thank you very much. It's been an absolute delight being in Namibia, but also experiencing different parts of the continent, and I hope to come back very soon.
Thank you for tuning in. Good night.